Hey lads, I thought for today's video I would do something a wee bit different. Go to an over the board in-person chess event and see what I can do. See if we can play one of these lads over the board and see how it goes. You want a timer? No,
I'm terrible at the timer.
Okay. Good luck, man.
So the game opened with Jabava London. My opponent went knight f6, and I immediately thought, is he going for a Pirc defense? And he didn't. He played this sort of weird Grunfeld kind of setup with a knight on f6 immediately. And so I pushed my pawn in the center up to e5, tempoing his knight away, allowing us to grab the pawn on d5. I was feeling very good here. I was just up a simple pawn, and he finquetted his bishop. So now I was trying to think about a tournament game that I had a few months back where I had this same sort of position, and I had remembered putting the knight on f3 was good because both of the pawns in the center can become under attack. So I knew I needed knight f3 at some point, so that's why I played it quite quickly. And here he kicked my knight away. Now the question was, what square should I put the knight on? I was really thinking about just bringing it back to c3. And the reason for this was I didn't see my pawns in the center under attack, and his development wasn't great. He's moved his knight twice, and so I didn't feel an issue retreating my knight after capturing the pawn. So I thought for a little while about this, but eventually ended up deciding to bring the knight back to c3. He short-castled, as he probably should, and here I was a little unsure. I didn't know if I should bring the bishop out or try to bring my light squared bishop out to c4. Decided on the dark squared bishop, and here he attacks the base of my pawn chain, kind of like a Benoni. But here I'm not able to push the pawn forwards. And the reason for that is because there is a pawn on e5, on e6, stopping my push. And so I wasn't sure if I should capture his pawn on c5 or if I should do something else. I was kind of deliberating between bishop c4 and queen d2. Now, the negatives for queen d2 were it's not really doing anything other than getting out of the way of the king castling. If I go queen c4 here, then as soon as he takes my pawn on d4, I could recapture with queen and then already, have a bishop developed on c4 and be clear to castle on the next move. So I wasn't entirely sure. I eventually decided on queen d2, as I thought it was better to prioritize castling before bringing any other pieces out. He captured my pawn in the center. I recaptured with bishop. I could have recaptured with queen, but I didn't want to get tempoed by the enemy knight. His knight came to c6, tempoing my bishop. I don't have to move it. It's only attacked once. But now my attention went over to the e5 pawn. Now the problem with his e5 pawn is it's attacked 3 times. His knight on c6, his knight on d7, and his bishop on g7. So I realized I could move my queen to defend it, but I figured I'll just give him the pawn back and prioritize rapid development. So I went for the castle. And here I was honestly quite surprised that he didn't recapture the pawn. I thought he was going to, but he decided to trade off his knight for my bishop, which I quickly recaptured with queen. And then he played his queen to c7. Eyeing that pawn again, so it's under attack 3 times. And I was really a wee bit worried here because I have a knight and a queen defending the pawn, but I didn't want to waste time putting my rook on d1 over on e1. It just seemed like it was already on an optimal square, and I didn't want to have to reposition it just to defend this pawn on e5. So I immediately went for the counter attack, playing my knight to b5, hitting his queen on c7. And I really thought this was a pretty nice move because if he wants to continue attacking my pawn, he needs to play his queen back to b8, which I knew was going to be a very passive square for his queen. If he did want to capture the pawn immediately, he'd only be able to do that with the queen, and then my knight could recapture him on e5. However, he could have captured with bishop, I capture with knight, and then he captures with queen. Then I'd have to capture with queen, and actually I think that that was winning for him. I wasn't entirely sure, but he ended up not going for the pawn, and he played his queen to c5, hitting my knight, which is defended by the bishop on f1, so I was okay, but hitting my queen as well, and I thought that this was probably the best move, apart from maybe capturing the pawn, which he didn't really seem like he wanted to go for. Now, that could be a blunder. I don't know if he would have captured that pawn. I didn't analyze it or look at it, but it seemed like that was the move to go for. So here I was a bit annoyed. I really wanted to keep the queens on, and I wanted to have rapid development and get my knights involved. I also wanted to hold on to this pawn, which was under attack 3 times. And so I ended up deciding on moving the rook to e1, something that I was hesitant to do earlier. So I played rook to e1, and I knew that my queen was probably coming off. He had a quick think about what he should do here, and then fairly promptly decided to swap the queens off. Here I deliberated a wee bit because I wasn't sure if I should capture with the b knight or the f knight. The f knight put my knight further into the position, but if I capture the f knight, then I lose control of the e5 pawn. So I took with the b knight, b takes d4, and here I have 2 defenders on the pawn on e5, and he's got 2 attackers, so I'm okay for the minute. But it wasn't easy for me to defend that e5 pawn. I really needed to maneuver my knight off of f3 and push my pawn to f4 to defend the e5 pawn. But that was easier said than done. My opponent went for b6, obviously preparing to go bishop b7, attacking my knight on f3, which was a key defender of the e5 pawn. So I kind of went for the same sort of thing. I went bishop b5, hitting his knight on d7, so that his knight couldn't attack e5. So he moved his knight to c5, and this gave me a chance. I thought, now that he's only got 1 attacker on the e5 pawn, I can move my knight off f3 and play my pawn forwards to f4 at some point. So I was trying to figure out what was the best square for the knight to f3 and decided on moving it to d2. My opponent played his rook to d8, attacking my knight on d4. And so I was thinking here for a little while, do I move my knight back to f3, except now it's the d4 knight? And I thought, no, I can't do that because then I'll never move my f pawn. So I was trying to consider, can I play knight to c6? And I thought knight c6 looked really good because it tempos his rook. But then I was wondering, can he go bishop b7? Or even a6, removing the defender of the knight and then capturing my knight. And I thought about this for a little while and then decided he really can't. He has to deal with the threat of his rook first. And so worst case scenario, his rook moves up to d5, maybe looking at my pawn, but it can never really move up to d6 because I had the pawn on e5. And so he put his bishop on b7 and I just captured his rook. He took my knight. I suppose he thought that my knight was more powerful. It was a very powerful piece. And they do say if you have a knight on the 6th rank as white, then it's worth 5 points. So it's just as good as a rook. So I did go for the exchange there. And honestly, I thought it was fairly okay to do this. And I felt comfortable. I thought my position was winning. I'm sure the engine says it's winning, but this game proves to be a lot more difficult than it looks if you're just counting the material. Here I saw his bishop was hitting b7 all the way over to g2. So I played f3. My opponent moves his rook up, targeting my e5 pawn, also getting ready for a discovery on my bishop on b5. And so I knew he was going to move his knight. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my bishop. And then I came up with this plan, knight c4. And maybe this was wrong. I'm not sure. but I thought it was very interesting regardless. He attacks my bishop on b5, and I can now capture the pawn on b6 with my knight. I thought this was really interesting because it attacks his rook. He was really not expecting this. And so when I captured the pawn, I think he kind of looked a bit confused, like, whoa, didn't expect that. But he calculated for a little while here, and I think what he calculated was correct. The material became equal here, and I probably should not have given 2 pieces for the rook and the pawn. It wasn't worth it, but that's what I went for, 2 pieces for the rook and the pawn. I now saw that my pawn was very weak on e5, same story of this entire game. So I played f4. However, this makes the g2 pawn quite weak. And so here, when my opponent pushed his pawn forwards, I saw that the g2 pawn was hanging, and I wanted to move my rook over to g1. Things started to get a wee bit tactical here. He played bishop h6, and I got the connect 4, h2, g3, f4, e5. Was pretty proud of this, but you could see that the f4 pawn is actually not able to move because his bishop is eyeing my king through it. And so the e5 pawn is not really protected by anything but my rook currently. And so here when he played g5, I was a little nervous. I was wondering, he's going to destroy my connect 4. He's cutting right into the middle of it. However, if g takes f4, I could recapture g takes f4, and my rook would be hitting his king. So I knew that I was a tempo okay. I just maneuvered my other rook over to d1 to attack his forward pawn. And here he deliberated, he was wondering, he was having a wee think, and then he decided on the move g takes f4, realizing that he was going to be checked. So he knew that he would have to move his king. So he went for this sequence. He captured the pawn. I recaptured with check, and he moved his king over to f8. I captured his pawn on d4 with my rook, and here he attacks my rook on d4 and my pawn on f4 by moving his knight to e6. Now, this was a little intense because I could see that my f4 pawn was hit 2 times, and I can't really defend it because I only have rooks. So if I do defend it, knight takes, rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes. He gets a rook and a pawn for 2 minor pieces. Maybe that's good for me. Maybe I should go for that trade. But I decided instead just to attack one of his other minors. I knew that he was going to take with check, which is what he did. Bishop takes f4 with check. And he's still hitting 2 pawns with his bishop. So I have to move my king. Now, maybe this was wrong of me. Maybe I should have just defended the pawn. Might have been in a better situation, but I wanted to keep my rooks as super active as I could. So here I moved my king over to b1. I didn't want to get tempoed by his bishop. So if I had gone to d1, then he could have brought his bishop to f3, hitting my king. And then my king would have to move again, and he would be out of danger, and then he'd be able to capture another pawn, probably the pawn on e5, maybe even the pawn on h2, hitting my rook on g1. So I definitely knew that king b1 was a better move here, but now it was his move, and he had to decide, is he going to save his bishop on b7, or is he going to try to do something else, like attack one of my rooks? So he moved his bishop all the way over to e4, a very active square, but here I could see that his bishops were lined up. And if you ever see the 2 minor pieces lined up beside each other, you can often attack both of them with a rook, because rooks are very powerful pieces. My opponent was laughing. He was a little stressed. He was saying that he had 3 minors, but it didn't really feel like as much material as my 2 rooks. He thought, saying my rooks were quite powerful, and I was saying, I'd like your 3 minors, please. But he moved his bishop here over to g6, centralizing it. No invasions on his king now. And so basically I have 2 rooks that need to try to mop up some minor pieces, some pawns, if I'm able to get them more active. He was attacking my pawn on h2, but I thought when you're attacked, one of the best ways to defend is by attacking yourself. And so even though he can take my pawn on h2 here, I knew that I could capture the pawn on b5. So yeah, he actually took the pawn on e5, which I was kind of happy to see, because as soon as I capture on b5, I'm hitting his bishop. However, he got my pawn on h2. And so I told him, I'm going to start pushing Arnold down the board. And then he said to me, I'm going to start pushing Harry down the board. And it became a pawn race. Now, although I wanted to push Arnold a little more, I knew I had to save my rook. So I moved my rook from g4 to g2, hitting his bishop. So now he has to waste a tempo with his bishop. And I can hopefully push Arnold a little closer to a8. So here he moved his bishop all the way over to c7, eyeing the a5 square where my pawn wants to promote to. But I knew that I could push Arnold because my rook was defending him. So I pushed, and here he decided to also push. I think this is honestly the right decision. If you're worried in a pawn endgame, about catching your opponent's pawn, often the best offense, best defense, best every fence is just to go offense and push. So he went h4 here. I went a6, eyeing his h4 to h3 push, knowing that he was going to hit my rook. And here I came up with maybe the brilliant move of the game. I haven't checked an analysis board, but I will keep that on the screen in front of you above here so you can see what the board says it is. But I thought that this move was pretty beautiful, and it took my opponent by surprise. I knew that the a8 square where Arnold wanted to promote to a queen was a light square, so I took his light squared bishop off on g6, and he was a little surprised about this. And here he probably made the big main mistake of the game. He was really trying to decide, should he go f takes g6 or should he push Harry? And I think the correct decision here is to capture my rook off. Capture my rook, I go a7, he goes h2, I go a8 check, and he can't check me on h1, but his bishop is protecting h2, so that might be okay. He didn't do that. He let my rook survive, and I went rook h6. So feeling very comfortable as soon as he did this. Now I don't know, I haven't checked on the engine, but this seemed like a win for me. Here he kind of seemed like he was a bit bummed. You know, he kind of knew that everything was probably over here. I was under attack here by his bishop on f4, so I thought, let's just get rid of that pawn. And he knew that that was probably a good decision. I probably could have done it in a better way, like forced his pawn to go to h1 and then captured it or something. I don't know, but I did just capture the pawn on h2, and then I pushed a7, and I'm one square from promotion. However, here he has knight c7, and this is very interesting because knight c7, how do I promote the pawn? I can't, because the pawn can't go to a8. Now what I was wondering is, okay, knight c7, rook b7, hitting the knight, but then the knight can hide on a8. And I could go rook b8 check, but then the bishop takes me. And I didn't realize that a takes b8 is actually winning for me. I didn't see it, and that would have just made the whole endgame way simpler. But I didn't see that that move there at the end. We had a little discussion here about the rook sack and the pawn pushes, but he ultimately here decided to go knight to c7 to try to stop me. And I didn't catch this idea of, again, tempoing his knight first and then going b8. So what I did didn't really work completely correctly. After my stupid rook check, I saw that he went king g7. I promoted the pawn. I took on a8 after he captured it with his knight. And now it was basically a rook, 2 pawns against a bishop and 1 pawn, where I could have actually had a queen. He pushed his pawn. I think this was good. I'm not able to immediately attack it because my rook can't get to the F file in a turn. And here I just decided I'm going to try to push my pawns together. Hopefully I'm winning. I'm almost positive I am winning, but I still had to finish this game. I went C4. He went F4. I brought my rook back to A3, stopping his pawn from promoting. He just maneuvered his bishop one square. Not entirely sure what bishop G1 does there, but I pushed B4, the two pawns together. I guess the bishop G1 is eyeing the pawn on C5 if it was to push. He moves his king over, and here I just kept pushing my pawns. Or did I? No, I moved my king to C2. King came over to C2. Don't know about that move, but he was centralizing his king, so I thought I would too. And here I had a rethink. I was like, should I keep centralizing my king and lose this game? Or should I push my pawn? And I did push my pawn. On C5, he can't capture it because it's protected by another pawn. And if he does capture it, I'll be very happy in an endgame there, knowing I can defend easily enough with one rook and a king. He moved his king more central. I kept pushing Charlie. Come on, Owen, you can push Charlie here. You know you can do it. You're not going to lose this game. I actually said to my opponent that I'm probably losing here, and he said, no, you're not. And that boosted me with such confidence that I brought my king all the way over to D1. Or was it D2? It was D2. He kept pushing, and I saw I can come over to E1. Even though he can push here, I can go to F1, even though his bishop's protecting F2. So king on F1, I'm happy as a what? I don't know what I'm as happy as, but here he tried to put his king on C5, but maybe C4 was better. Both moves I know are losing according to the engine. My rook is totally fine. I could have gone to A6 if he had gone immediately to C4 and just tempoed his bishop and then pushed my pawns. So I would have been totally fine, but the way it happened was I just brought my rook here back to B1. He tries to run his king around. I put my rook on C1, just defending the pawn. Not really sure what I'm doing. I guess I'm blocking his king off from advancing onto the C file. He's running around the back now. I just made a waiting move. I said that's what it was. Rook C2. He maneuvers his king all the way over to C7. And I was really just like, what is the way to finish this game? And then on this move, I finally realized, I was like, why is this so difficult? This is so hard to find a way to push these pawns. And then I saw I can actually just capture on F2. And, oh, it wasn't actually quite yet. I went rook D2, and I guess he maneuvered his bishop. And then I captured on F2, which I thought was pretty cool. So Owen just finds the move here, lads. Here it goes. There it was. Rook takes F2, bishop takes F2, king takes F2, and now his king can never capture both of my pawns because they're staggered. If he ever takes the B5 pawn, then the C6 pawn is going to promote. And so I can just maneuver my king all the way up. And this endgame is a fairly simple affair. I'm able to promote the pawns fairly easily here. And I wasn't going to let him stalemate me, so I made sure that when I promoted these pawns, that I promoted them to rooks, because rooks are much harder to stalemate with. Here he goes king b7, his only move. I go king d7, holding on to the c8 square, which he can no longer protect or get in front of. And here he had a little think, and he finally put his king on a8. He was, no, on a6. I made a rook, and he was bombed because there was no stalemate tricks. He moved his king to b7 here. I just pulled my rook back, and he put his king back on a6. I go b7. He goes a5, I think, if I remember. Yes, and here I just got another rook, and he knew that it was over here because I was not going to stalemate this endgame. good game, brother. I really enjoyed playing you. I hope you enjoyed my commentary. I played with a 76.8% accuracy and my opponent with a 70.9. We did have that brilliant move, but we also had 4 inaccuracies, 6 mistakes, and 3 misses. So not the cleanest chess, but that's me. If you do want to watch another one of these kinds of games, do let me know in the comments. I've got another one that I can edit and chuck up here if you enjoy them. Bye for now.